Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove, and this is part 3 of our 3-part series with Dr. Debashish Banerji on the language of the gods, by which I mean, of course, Sanskrit. Dr. Banerji is the academic dean at the University of Philosophical Research. He is also an adjunct faculty member at Pasadena City College and the California Institute of Integral Studies. He is the author of several books, including Seven Quartets of Becoming, a transformative yoga psychology based on the Diaries of Sri Aurobindo, and also Rabindranath Tagore in the 21st century, and The Alternative Nation of Abanindranath Tagore, who happens to be his great-grandfather. Welcome once again, Debashish.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Pleasure to be with you.
Likewise.
Now let us turn our attention to some of the more esoteric concepts in the Sanskrit tradition. I'd like to talk about the Chakras and about the Tantric tradition, which I understand the Tantric tradition may be among the very oldest of the traditions in India.
Yes, it's very possible. The Tantric literature comes a little late. It comes around the 4th or 5th century. But Tantric practices may go back all the way to the Indus Valley. We find seals in the Indus Valley that show yogis in postures that are clearly related to Kundalini rising experiences. Postures in which they press up against the perineum. And those postures are indicated in raising the Kundalini up the spine.
Now we better define Kundalini.
Sure.
Is that a Sanskrit word?
It's a Sanskrit word. It means that which is coiled up. And it refers to what they call the serpent power. What is the belief is that there is a kind of a potential energy that is coiled up at the base of everybody's spine. There's also a cosmological significance, the idea that there is a power, a transcendental power that has become involved in the cosmos and lies as a potential energy in it. As you know, potential energy is often depicted as a spring. A spring can open up and release its latent energy. So in these ancient traditions, they saw this living power, sleeping power, as a serpent. So at the base of the spine, there is a serpent that is asleep. And by doing certain kinds of exercises, the idea was that it would be made to wake up and travel up the spine and then rise up to a plane of superconscious above the head where it would go into union with the divine.
Now the interesting thing here is that the symbolism of the snake can be found in many cultures. The symbol of the medical profession, the caduceus, is 2 coiled snakes.
Correct, exactly. And so this idea of the 2 coiled snakes and a central column and the intertwined snakes meeting at the top is an image that is central to Tantra, and it describes the way in which the spinal column becomes the conduit for the traveling of this energy from the base of the skull to the spine to the top of the skull. And there are 2 other energy channels around this central channel, which can result in 2 other flows of energy that are like the intersecting serpents.
Now Tantra is also a Sanskrit word.
Yes. Tantra is a Sanskrit word, and it has several etymologies. Exactly what is its beginning, we really don't know. It can mean technology. It can mean a certain kind of a method to transcend the body. It can mean weaving, as in a process by which we form a certain new personality within us. So there are all these kinds of connotations. It may go back to the Indus Valley, where they were probably using these methods to generate energy inside the human system. It also includes the notion of the chakras, as you mentioned. The chakras are nodes or centers of energy that lie along the spine. And in the traditional system, there are supposed to be 7 chakras. In later yogic literature, tantric literature, they sometimes increase the number of chakras. But in the traditional mainstream literature, these chakras are related to, in fact, the kind of 3 qualities that you mentioned, tamas, rajas, and sattva.
In our previous interview, the 3 gunas.
The 3 gunas, because they're connected to those 3 modalities of consciousness: material, vital, and mental. So a purely physical level, we have the chakra at the base of the spine, below which it's called the Mooladhara, and the serpent power lies at that center. And then you have 3 centers of the life energy that may be called rajasic in a way. One is at the sex center, which controls our sexual activity.
Yes.
Then higher than that is at the center of the navel, which controls our will.
Yes.
The primordial will. In China and Japan, they make a lot of use of that particular center. They call it the hara, because that's the center from which energy is gathered.
It's very important in the martial arts.
In the martial arts, right. Then there is a center at the heart, which relates to the emotions. And then, so those 3 centers have to do with the life energies. And then you have 3 centers, one at the throat, which is about expression, the power to express. One between the eyes, which has to do with insight.
The third eye
the
chakra.
Third eye chakra, yeah.
Yes.
And one above the head, which is the center of superconscience.
Yeah, and the word chakra itself, what does that mean in Sanskrit?
It means circle. It means circle. And so these are supposed to be nodes or circular, sometimes called lotuses, that are closed, the petals are closed. And just as the Kundalini is a serpent that is asleep and wakes up as it goes up the spine, these lotuses bloom or blossom, they open up. And the hidden powers within the chakra, by which activities of these different kinds are carried out, become active, and we can develop paranormal powers at each of these levels.
I have heard the chakra system described as sort of an overview that would pretty much include all of Western psychology, from Freud to Adler and Jung. And
interesting, yes. Probably, yes.
So all the different modes of consciousness seem to be expressed there and related to different parts of the body.
Exactly.
And I understand that in the chakra system, the Tantric or Kundalini system of various lineages, that there are very, very detailed descriptions of how this energy travels up the body and what happens if it gets stuck or blocked in different locations.
Yes,
how to cure those different conditions.
Yes, indeed.
Almost as if the yogis viewed this like the way we might look at the blood circulation and the lymph nodes. And
yes, it's a circulation.
Physical anatomy. It's sort of like the anatomy of the subtle body.
Right, absolutely. And these channels, or nadis as they're called, through which the prana flows, the life energy, as well as the kundalini that rises, they form the basis of all these medical systems, alternative medical systems of the East, like Ayurveda, or even for that matter, Chinese acupuncture. They're drawing on the channels through which these energies are going. Just like you said, it's like a subtle anatomy, an occult anatomy, which is treated with as much reality as we give to the understanding of the circulatory system in Western medicine.
Now, I'm guessing, but my thinking is that the chakra system may have been developed through introspection, and very possibly because, I'm not sure, but in the ancient culture of India, as in some Western cultures as well, to cut open a cadaver and examine the anatomy was sort of forbidden or not a common practice. So introspection became the tool of the scientists, in effect, of that era.
Yes, through introspection and experiences of various kinds, by experimenting with consciousness, I think they came up with these systems. And what's interesting is that they are systems that relate to the mother goddess. So even if we go back to the Indus Valley, there was the worship of little mother goddesses called matrikas. And I mean, matrika is a much later word. It's a Sanskrit word that means little mother.
I see.
But we refer to little goddesses like that in Tantra. And in the idea is that the whole world, in Tantra, the idea is it's the body of the mother. So even if we connect it to the Vedic tradition and talk about Maya as being the creatrix, we can see her in the Tantric tradition as a very empowering goddess, mother goddess, whose body is this cosmos. And she also is immanent in all the creatures of the cosmos as the Kundalini. So she has a personalized presence in each being as the coiled energy at the bottom of their spine. And she is the goddess who controls the activities inside each of the chakras. So some of the old Indus Valley seals will show 7 goddesses, like matrikas, that represent the goddess at each of these chakras, so that when the energy rises, they can direct them. And by worshipping these, by visualizing, you talked about introspection.
Yes.
In the Tantric and even in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, which is very deeply based in Tantra, there are visualization exercises for seeing these goddesses in various parts of one's body. The more sophisticated the exercise, the greater the number of goddesses they have to see. And then these goddesses become active, and one becomes the witness of the activity of these goddesses carrying out their paranormal exercises inside one's being.
Well, I think it's very interesting to note that not only in the Indus Valley, but pretty much throughout the known world, the most ancient cultures all had the worship of a mother goddess or a fertility goddess.
Right.
And the worship of the goddess was often associated with the body, as opposed to the sky gods that came later on, who were more or less transcendental or outside the body.
Very true. And we find in the Hindu tradition, by the time 4th, 5th century, these traditions are rising, becoming mainstream, I'd say. I'd say they were always there, but they become really powerful and mainstream around the 4th, 5th century. There is a marriage between what you're calling the sky gods and the earth goddesses.
Yes.
And so we talked about Purusha and Prakriti as, if we want to call it, consciousness or the soul and nature. So the soul part becomes the province of the male gods. You start seeing the Puranic gods like Vishnu, Shiva, Ganesha, etc. And their consort, they always have a consort. It's always the couple. It's a tradition that empowers the coupling of consciousness and its properties, its energies.
You see in the Tantric temples many statues and images of the male and female deities together making love.
Right.
And experience a sort of a supreme ecstasy at the same time, very very physical and very spiritual.
Spiritual, right. So it's the idea is that the union of these two actually makes for a divine life on earth. So this is the new idea, the idea that it's not just escape into the sky or just delving into the earth and its powers, but by using the liberation that one gets in the higher spheres to reconditioning nature so that it expresses these creative divine energies.
You've used the word paranormal several times, and I think it's probably fair to say that there's almost never in the Sanskrit tradition, particularly the pre-modern Sanskrit traditions, ever any question regarding the existence and potentials of paranormal ability.
Yes, no, there isn't any question. I mean, a number of that's a very important point I think you make, Jeffrey. I'd like to extend that also by saying there is hardly ever any question about whether God exists. So this entire concern about atheism and theism, it's really a kind of a made-up concern. Over here, the tradition is one in which people experience God or don't experience God. That's much more the question, not whether God exists or not, which is really a kind of a hypothetical question, a speculative question. Here it's a question of whether that experience has been had or not been had. So I think similarly over here, paranormal powers, either you experience them or you are on the way to experiencing them. Never a question whether they exist or not.
But in many spiritual traditions, including some forms of yoga, I'm sure, maybe because they've been influenced by British Victorian culture, I don't know. There's this notion that paranormal abilities are a distraction, something to be avoided. They might help reinforce the ego. They're going to prevent one from achieving enlightenment. But the Tantric tradition is a little different than that, is it not?
Yes, you're very right there again, Jeffrey, because I think there is it's not only due to Victorian sort of morality, but I think there is a somewhat legitimate concern that some yogis have felt, because it's true that one might get stuck in exploring paranormal powers and not achieve the higher states of consciousness. So they've warned against getting stuck there. They've said evade them or avoid them, etc. But the Tantric tradition has always believed in assimilating and incorporating, in becoming fully what one's potential is, and traveling up the scale of consciousness and experiencing the whole of the ladder of consciousness. So I think, the Indian teacher Sri Aurobindo was of the opinion that we use power whether we like it or not. Everybody is using some kind of power. We are using secular power. A person is given a certain office. That person uses the power of that office. So if we have latent powers within us, we should use them to the best of our ability. I mean, we should use it for good. And our understanding of what is good can change depending on our state of consciousness. So we should raise our state of consciousness rather than, put a taboo on the use of these powers.
But would it be fair to say that in the Indian Sanskrit spiritual traditions, there are, in effect, two distinct threads, one being that a liberation is achieved by escaping the bonds of conditioning, and the other that liberation is achieved by gaining power over the world of conditioning?
Yes, absolutely. I think there are two traditions that develop over time, and sometimes they are loosely equated to the Vedantic and the Tantric traditions. The Vedantic tradition, particularly post-Shankara, has tended towards empowering the escape from material pursuits. And the Tantric tradition has been concerned with enjoyment and the enhancement of power in the material world. I think there are three major goals in Tantra. One is power, one is enjoyment, and the third is immortality, physical immortality. So these things are also seen as not very legitimate in the traditional Vedantic tradition. But over time, there have been a variety of synthesis of these two as well.
You might view it as one tradition saying liberation is achieved by letting go of all desires.
Right.
And the other is liberation is achieved by fulfilling all desires.
Right, exactly. And then you have some schools, like in Sri Aurobindo's teaching, he's saying that the true condition for full enjoyment and for the perfect manifestation of one's powers is true liberation. If you're liberated, then you use it as the divine wants you to use it. You can creatively use it according to a higher consciousness. So there have been synthesis of these kinds.
And that's what would be called the integral approach.
Yes.
And for viewers who are interested in this part of our conversation, they should check their listings, because eventually we will be releasing a 3-part series on integral yoga and the philosophy of Sri Aurobindo. But for now, we're talking about the language of the gods, about Sanskrit and Tantra.
Right.
And this a very elaborate system of chakras. And another term you use we didn't define for our viewers was Nadis.
Right. Nadis means channels, and these are subtle channels, just like the central column that I spoke about, which runs between the Kundalini and the 1,000-petaled chakra above the head, with the spinal channel. It's actually a subtle. It's not really the spinal column, but it is contiguous with the spinal column in the subtle body, and it's a channel, and it's called the Shushumna. So similarly, there are radiating channels that pervade our entire anatomy, and these channels are channels through which energy is flowing, subtle energy is flowing.
Now that's an interesting term.
Those are nadis.
Subtle, that's an English word, not a Sanskrit
Absolutely,
word. But isn't it true that in the Sanskrit tradition there are more than one subtle body?
Yes. So the subtle word, there is it's a literal translation for the word shukshma. Shukshma is what's being translated as subtle. So sukshma is a gradation. Sukshma, it means subtle because the material body itself, according to this yogic Sanskritic tradition, is a kind of a really dense matter, and there are various degrees of rarefied matter within our physical body itself. So they constitute what one might call a subtle material body. Subtle material body, sukshma deha they call it. And then within that there are other kinds of bodies. I talked about physical, and then the life energy is connected with 3 chakras, mind energy. So there is a mind body and a life body, which is called the pranamaya sharira and the manomaya sharira, or the vital. If we, that it's interesting that term also is related to medieval Western understandings of life energy, the vital, which again enters into modern philosophy to some extent with Henri Bergson's vitalism. And then people like Gilles Deleuze are returning to this idea of the vital as a different modality of consciousness.
Bergson is a very important philosopher of the early 20th century, late 19th century. Incidentally was very interested in parapsychological research.
Absolutely, yes.
I believe was even a president of the Society for Psychical Research.
Interesting.
So his philosophy is very important, and there is a renewed interest in it now. But these bodies, would it be fair to say that as there are 7 chakras, we have 7 different vital bodies?
So there's a material body, there is a vital body, body that relates to 3 chakras, and there's a mental body that relates to 3 chakras. But then there are other bodies. So they talk about a causal body, which is like a supermind. It's an infinite intelligence rather than an intelligence tied to finite things. Then there is a bliss body. There is a body of pure consciousness, and there is a body of pure being. So these are the 7. In the Sanskrit, it's interesting, in the Upanishadic tradition, they say that only 5 of these are actually available to us, even to yogis. And the last 2 are attained only in very supremely advanced states, where one has stabilized these 5 bodies in one's waking life. Then you can do it.
In other words, the Sanskrit traditions are pointing toward the future evolution of a human being beyond that which is even known today.
Very true, exactly. Absolutely right, Jeffrey. That's exactly what it is. It's a future evolution of the human being, taking what we have, but opening up the possibilities that lie hidden, and finally forming the basis of an even further advance.
Well, that's very exciting to me, and I should think our viewers would find it very exciting as well, to think that there's such an ancient language that has mapped out in great detail, one could say a roadmap into a future well beyond anything we've yet experienced.
I completely agree. And it's available to us. And that's one of the very interesting things about the Sanskritic tradition. We may say that there have been ancient traditions all over the world that had some kind of notion of this occult body and its possibilities. But in the Sanskritic tradition, we see a kind of continuity in practice, so that people, the discursive tradition, just like we have a very large literature of Western philosophy, there is a very large and complex continuing literature in Sanskrit philosophy, written by people who are actually having these experiences and thinking, introspecting about them. And so it's a tradition that we can draw on today, were we to take the trouble of delving into it.
And one might even think of it as a form of science, although different than our conventional Western empirical science. It might be based on what William James once called radical empiricism.
Absolutely, I agree. William James also pointed to the introspective method in science. And I think this is what it lends itself to. The Sanskritic tradition is something that is inviting us, even today, to experiment with these ideas and introspect and be scientific about our discoveries. I think that is the invitation of this tradition.
Well, Debashish Banerji, thank you so much for sharing these 3 interviews on the language of the gods.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
And thank you for being with us.